Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Panel Jumper Lite, a very self-indulgent thing that Cole Hornaday and I have decided to do during the quarantine, the lockdown, which seems to be going on forever. My name, of course, is Ben Laurance. With me is the Panel Jumper himself, Cole Hornaday. How are you, Cole?
I'm well, Ben. Are we going to jibber jabber now?
We're gonna jibber jabber.
Yay!
What should we jibber jabber about?
Well, I think you got some bullet points of things that you thought would be clever to discuss, and I was and I concur with you on those things.
Yeah, great.
What you got for me?
Cool. Well, first off, I want to tease that we're going to have another excerpt from our interview with Barry Ira Geller at the end of
Great.
today's show. Today, we spoke with him a little bit ago. We're kind of late in getting this interview out, but he talked about his experience with Jack Kirby and the Science Fiction Land theme park. And today, we're going to talk to him about working with Jack to basically set up the aesthetic for Science Fiction Land and what it was like to work with the king of comics. But in the meantime, Cole Hornaday, there was something there's something that is happening in Japan. There's a Godzilla museum. Have you heard of this thing?
I catch dribs and drabs because people will forward images to me on Twitter and on Facebook and whatnot. So it looks like the latest information, and we have it on the Panel Jumper Facebook page, is a couple of rides which look like they are
Zip lines.
zip lines where you're like zip lining into the mouth of the monster. But all of these images, what I thought was really intriguing was all the images of the big sculptures that we're looking at for the park are all the contemporary Shin Godzilla, the radioactive, mutated, kind of frankly gory and nightmarishly disturbing monster that now I guess is our contemporary images of Godzilla as opposed to the Shet and other forms that came before. There are a couple of images of the park and the exhibits themselves and the suits and things like that. So yeah, I can't imagine how cool this park is in reality.
Yeah.
The Japanese, they love their theme parks. They've got one that's just devoted to Attack on Titan, which when I first saw the images of the giant skinless zombies where you can I don't know, buy noodle cups out of their giant tummies and stuff. That's like, no, this is just a little bit too creepy for me. So I don't think that, where theme parks are concerned, the Japanese always practice a great deal of discretion.
So it's part of another theme park in the
Oh, okay.
of the and
Perhaps
I'm
it has
gonna
the Attack on Titan giant zombies, skinless zombies as well.
maybe I didn't see that article, but it's this a theme park in the Hyogo Prefecture's Awaji Island. I'm probably terribly mispronouncing all of that. I'm
You're
sorry.
doing better than I could.
It's not yet set to open. It's not ready. It's been delayed because the world is on fire. Thanks in no part, I'm sure, to Godzilla. And but there's going to be a bunch of other things you can do. A bunch of kids' activities. You can like create a Godzilla, because as we know, Godzilla is friend to all children.
That's Gamera.
Anyway, but yeah, what you were talking about was the
You got to be able to distinguish your Gamera from your Godzilla. This is crucial nerd stuff.
all kaiju are equal in my eyes.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, that brings up another thing. I'm going to mention this one thing briefly, and then I want to ask you about kaiju. So yeah, what you were talking about was the zip line. You can zip line into Godzilla's mouth. You can
Right.
also zip line through his body, through its body. I don't know if Godzilla is gendered. Or you can also go just around Godzilla. And there's also a shooting game where you can destroy cells coming off of Godzilla's body to prevent them from reproducing.
And that's the whole Shin Godzilla creepiness right there. Where one of the last, I don't know, did you see that film that came out a couple of years, the most recent one,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago? And there's that close shot of it, and it's like Godzilla is budding, or it's like fruiting bodies,
Right.
and there are little tiny versions that are popping off it. That actually really really creeped me out. So that's what you can do in the shooting gallery, is
Yeah.
shoot those little homunculi. That's great. Great.
It sounds like total fun. But the question I want to pose to you is something that I saw on Facebook recently. Clifford the Big Red Dog, kaiju or no?
Well, part of that destruction, or part of the destruction, part of that conversation and where I tried to steer it and it got immediately derailed was, let's talk about the kaiju path of destruction, because most kaiju are not really kaiju unless they, seek and destroy cities and such. But like friends hopped on that thread, and not only then they bring up Clifford the Big Red Dog, but also the Jolly Green Giant and maybe James's Giant Peach. I don't know. But it's like, are these threatening giant creatures, or are they, do they stomp on buildings? Do they inadvertently knock things up? The one thing that I always marveled about Clifford was that he never seemed to leave a path of destruction. He brought a modicum of chaos, but how can like a 20-foot tall red dog not? I ask you.
I don't know.
So would I call him a kaiju? I think we've been stretching that term a lot over the last couple of years, especially when it comes to Western influences on kaiju mentality. So I'm going to, you know what, Ben? I'm going to keep that door open for now.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep that open. The possibility's there. I'm not 100% convinced. The way I'm not 100% convinced the Jolly Green Giant is a kaiju. So.
All right. Yeah, it's funny because kaiju, to me, the term monster always enters into the picture, and I don't consider the Jolly Green Giant to be a monster. He's just a big green dude who wants to who wants you to eat more healthy vegetables.
Get your greens. Get your roughage.
Eat your greens. I forwarded you this article. Actually, I forwarded back to you because you posted a lot of these articles. I just swiped from articles you posted on the Panel Jumpers Facebook page.
That's called collaboration, Ben. There's nothing wrong with that.
But I forwarded you this article with the title "Jeffrey Dean Morgan must be pissed."
So this Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the gentleman the actor who played Negan on Walking Dead, right?
Yeah.
So there's after I can't even tell you. Do you recall how long that was when they introduced Negan to the TV show?
I think it was in season 7.
Okay, and how many years ago was that?
3, maybe. I want to say that they're on their 10th season right now.
Yeah. What's interesting is this article pops up now. And I don't know, maybe AMC is running the numbers now because of past seasons, because they're looking at the money that they've got that's on the table with all the lawsuits happening between the Darabont lawsuit and the Barry Kirkman lawsuits and whatnot. Maybe they're reassessing all the takes from our various seasons. But I think it's really interesting that this came up now, that there's this discussion of the viewership that they lost when they introduced this character. Because frankly, that's when I quit. I was done. I read the comic book from beginning to end. I knew what was coming, but frankly, I was shocked and revolted by how that part of the story was dealt with, because there's always been a number of challenging things about translating that comic book to television or to live action. And one of them that we talked about, and I brought up before, that we learned, that we were reminded when we had Stefano Gaudiano, the inker of the comic, on the live show, was there was a reason why the book was in black and white. And that was to create a distancing effect for the viewer, for the reader, from the gore and the violence. Whereas the TV show decided that was not ever going to be an issue. The gore and the violence and
selling point.
Yeah, was going to be the selling point of the show. So, and I think that season premiere was 2 hours. In the original comic book, Glenn does get bludgeoned to death. And that's a big deal. I'm sorry, spoilers, but it's happened in 2 different mediums and it's a while ago. So don't get grumpy with me at this point. But then there was the other character that we also bludgeoned to death. And then we spend the next hour watching Rick Grimes being psychologically and emotionally and physically tortured by Negan, which to my recollection was not in the comic book. So it just took this nosedive into torture porn that I didn't really want to have any part of. So I backed out. And what was interesting is that I remember posting something on Facebook about it, and I had a lot of supportive viewpoints and a handful of friends who said, yeah, I'm done with the show. It's gone in a direction I don't need to go into. It's one thing to be, blowing up the heads of zombies and having a survival story, but when it turns into this much loathing of humanity, I have to tap out.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is the people that hopped on to the discussion who actually got offended by me feeling that, me and the other people who were resonating in that area. And I actually unfriended people. I was like,
Oh, really?
yeah, there's a couple of people who were like, well, anybody, you're not a true horror fan, or, this is just a lot of whining, and you knew what you were in for when you signed on, kind of thing. I'm like, no. I'm practicing a certain amount of discernment and good taste, and I'm out. So I think it's kind of interesting that at this point now, people are going, oh yeah, AMC's going, oh yeah, we didn't consider how many viewers we would have lost. I'm like, and my other concern going forward is that that was just an indication of how vicious that show was going to be going forward, and I didn't want to play anymore. I didn't want to watch a show that celebrated that, because ultimately that's what it does.
Yeah.
It's not life affirming. It doesn't lift one up to watch it, as far as I'm concerned. All it does is reinscribe our self-loathing and our hatred for our neighbors. So I was done.
I'm kind of with you on that. I stopped. I did see that episode that you just described where Negan bludgeons Glenn and emotionally and physically tortures Rick. I think I may have watched that entire season just because I'm a completist.
I think you did, yeah, because I did check in with you on time to time. Yeah. I checked in with you just to make sure that I made the right choice for me.
And you did. I haven't gone back. I haven't wanted to go back because, it's right. I remember, like, in one regard, it did what it wanted to do. I had such a visceral reaction, an emotional reaction to that episode, because like so many bad things are happening to these characters that I've come to, enjoy spending an hour a week with or whatever. And I just it felt like pain watching this TV show now. And it was just one of those things where it was like, why? I'm going to turn on Archer now. I don't want to watch this. I just want something that makes me laugh. I don't. The zombie hellscape is a terrible place. I think we get that. Yeah, but I wouldn't. It wasn't the character of Negan, though. Like Jeffrey Dean Morgan is he's a very charismatic actor. I enjoyed watching him. It was just how they treated everything, and you have to give your audience like a little glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel, right? To make them keep walking through, before they get hit by the train. So, yeah, So yeah, I totally agree. I haven't gone back. Probably won't go back to watch it, but it's not stopping AMC, however, from milking that dead cow. Or if that's not even. I'm sorry, I said that.
Undead.
Yeah, that undead cow, because they say they want to have The Walking Dead on for, it's been on for 10 years. They want it on for 10, 20 more years. They have Fear the Walking Dead. That's still going strong. There's a new Walking Dead spinoff, and the name is going to come to me. It's not coming to me, and I'm not seeing it on this article. But there's yet another Walking Dead spinoff. They're going to be releasing a movie. So yeah, we have not seen the end of The Walking Dead.
I have a hard time believing that property is that viable anymore. That it's, and if it is, the audience that they're cultivating is not an audience that I want to be spending time around. The kids that were wearing the Negan t-shirts and dressed up as Negan for Halloween with their Lucille baseball bats with the barbed wire twined around it. I'm like, I don't really understand why you think you want to be celebrating this character. But someone pointed out to me at one point, it's like, well, the people who are celebrating this character are the people who grew up watching Freddy Krueger movies and Jason Voorhees movies, and those characters are their anti-heroes. And that's something for me personally is very, very difficult to relate to. But then again, I can't relate to Deadpool and other characters of that ilk that kind of survive on violence and loathing like that. It's just not for me.
The World Beyond is the name of the new Walking Dead TV show. They,
And I can't really ignore the fact that Chris Casso had pointed out before the closing of Comics Dungeon that books that were gathering dust on the shelves were the numerous volumes of Walking Dead books. And as someone who tries to resell collectibles on the secondary market, I can't get rid of Walking Dead action figures and stuff. People don't want them. So I kind of wonder if that market is not oversaturated. I guess what we really should be looking at are the Walking Dead Funko Pops. How well are those Funko Pops selling?
who knows? Yeah, speaking of collectibles, Boom Studios' ineptitude inadvertently made some collectible comics. Did you hear about this story? Of course you did. You posted it on the Facebook page.
Yeah, but you're looking at the article. That's just like somebody's excruciatingly editorial. Some editors really no good, very bad day, because the first one had a sexy cover and it was going to be bagged and boarded, and the covering of the sexy images.
Yeah. So
The
first off,
Go ahead.
I just want to say which magazine it is. It's Faithless 2 by Brian Azzarello and Maria Lovett. And yeah, it had a Sexy Times cover, and it was supposed to be sent with in a bag with an opaque cover covering up more sensitive bits, so you won't be embarrassed receiving this in like a shared house or whatever.
Or a shop owner won't lose his shop.
Exactly.
He sold it to a minor or something.
Exactly. However, the board in the front did exactly the opposite. It covered the non-sexy bits and leaving everything else out in plain view. So they recalled them. They recalled all those comics, and that means that they created a scarcity. So obviously the speculators seized the opportunity, and bagged copies were selling for about $20 on eBay, whereas this is normally like a $5.99 book, I guess.
Probably.
Yeah. So.
And then,
yeah.
So strike one.
Strike one. And then, so I'm just going to read from this article. Boom rushed a second printing of Faithless 2 number 2 to retailers to meet demand after that issue immediately sold out. So they're like, oh man, this isn't selling like hotcakes because of our screw up. Let's get second printing out. But it was reprinted with the interiors of number 1 inside. And so once Diamond Distributing realized that, they're like, all right, burn them, get rid of them, trash them, whatever. We're taking them back, the ones that we still have. Again, creating more scarcity on the market. And so yeah, it just was like falling over themselves, trying to, A, of all cover their mistake, and B, of all, capitalize on it. And they created collectibles, which probably by now I think that wave is probably crested, but yeah, I think that was kind of funny.
It just evoked a tremendous amount of empathy in me to to keep tripping over one's feet this way. Just like, it was killing me. And I was waiting for a third shoe to drop. Oh my God, what was the third thing that happened trying to publish this comic book? But hey, let's face it. Had you ever heard of the book before this? Because I wasn't familiar with it. And now it's in my brain.
Yeah. So this was all just a big marketing ploy.
Well, I'm a little bit dubious of that. But is it, sometimes fate turns, sometimes, bad luck can be great marketing. Sometimes.
Speaking of ineptitude in the comic books world, you know where I'm going with this one. DC Comics has maybe ineptitude isn't the right word, but they're in the news lately, on the radar for a bunch of things that happened. A of all, they had a Black Friday in terms of laying people off recently. They got rid of Bob Harris, their editor-in-chief, Hank Canals, their senior vice president of publishing strategy and support services, Bobby Chase, VP global publishing initiatives and digital strategy, Brian Cunningham. Basically, a bunch of higher-ups got let go. Jim Lee is still with the company,
right?
Doing whatever he does.
I think we discussed earlier, we're talking about upwards of, so we don't know actually how many people from DC proper were laid off. Maybe it's in an article somewhere, but between AT&T, Warner, and from top to the bottom, we're looking at one of the quotes that we saw was close to 600 people
600,
were laid off. I don't, we were looking at, DC was looking at a lot of really scary fragmentation that was happening before the pandemic. I mean, we still don't have the final the button on the story of what happened with Dan Didio's hasty exit, because when he quit, a lot of projects were up in the air, so they're in the process of trying to like retread some of these things and retool them and figure out how they're going to, all the crossovers, the 5G, the fifth generation, umpteenth reboot of the DC universe that they were working on, and then all these things started happening. And then we had the plague, and then all these things started happening. So, and in the fan community, this sparks a tremendous amount of speculation. Once again, I'm going to plug our friend Chris Cassow's Trusty Henchman newsletter. Even though Chris is not managing a comic book store anymore, he is got his thumb on all the things that are happening, and I highly recommend subscribing to his Trusty Henchman newsletter. You got different levels from $5, $10, $25 on up, but he did a great breakdown, and I'm giving him credit. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of how he sees things happening, which I really appreciated. And he was also trying to point out some good things from a retailer perspective and from a reader's perspective. And one is that now that the editors-in-chief have been let go, DC now has two female editors-in-chief for the first time in 80 years. So Marie Javins and Michelle Wells are now, at the helm, and that can be pretty exciting. That finally have two women offering their talents and experience in running the company.
Yeah.
A couple other things that he brought up, which I really appreciated. He said, well, Black Label is pretty much going to be phased out, which is sort of exhausting after all the buildup. And I'm like, yeah, we never got to figure out what Black Label was supposed to be about, except it was NC-17 DC superheroes.
Yeah, but we did talk about it extensively on the podcast.
Yeah. This means the DC Universe streaming service is pretty much dead, but I think they were already talking about folding that into the HBO Max. So there's some good things happening. There's some bad things happening. Once again, they are taking the axe to many, many titles. And sadly, the truth is that I read so few DC comics, it's not really impacting me. But they're canceling the new Hellblazer series, which was part of the Black Label line, which, was kind of like, you don't have Vertigo anymore, but at least you're placing John Constantine in a more mature storytelling vein. And I really love what Spurrier was doing with him. And I'm actually sad about that. So they're going to be canceling John Constantine at the 12th issue. And, aside from that, I'm sorry, it's not going to impact me that badly.
But it will impact people who are reading Teen Titans, Young Justice, Suicide Squad, Hawkman, and some others. Right.
Those books are on the rotational chopping block, though. Those are the low to mid sellers that have a hardcore following. I following Hawkman is like a microcosm of following the reboots and reincarnations of the DC universe proper, because it's just, you seriously need a flowchart and red yarn and a big wall to keep track of all the Hawkman and Hawkgirl and Hawkwoman incarnations and what happened in what book and whether it's still relevant and whether it should be relevant or if you even care, so that's one of those that just like that book is so editorially saturated that I can't. We should just let that book be dead for a while, like a long time.
Chris.
I'm gonna offend Hawkman fans out there at Six Ways Monday, and I
Right.
respect that.
All right. If you're offended by Cole's anti-Hawkman stance, let us know in the comments. Chris also says in his Trusty Henchman rant that there have been predictions that DC will eventually license their characters to be published elsewhere, much like what Marvel's been doing, pardon me, with IDW, now Scholastic, which prompted Jim Lee to have to issue a statement saying, we're actually going to still be making comics here at DC.
The same anxiety cropped up when Marvel filed for bankruptcy back in the 90s. Same thing. People heard the same kind of rumors. They're going to stop printing comic books and just take all of their IPs and translate them into movies and video games and this and that and the other thing. And it didn't happen. And in fact, we got some amazing cinematic achievements following that bankruptcy. So from the ashes and frustration and disappointment of that time period, now Marvel is a superpower. And it probably didn't hurt that they got bought by Disney, who pumped more energy and more money into that universe. But look what became of Marvel. And for anybody that's been reading Marvel and DC for a long period of time, okay, me, it always goes in cycles. DC was on top of the heap in the 80s and was doing a tremendous amount of innovation in storytelling. And then they cycled down, and at that time, Marvel was not being particularly successful, but then Marvel cycled up. So as far as the two big predators in the comic book entertainment industry jungle, I think it's just this part of the cycle. And there's a lot of speculation online that this, that, or the other thing caused the layoffs. And the truth of the matter is, I think a lot of this stuff has been coming, a long time coming. But I think one thing to be really, really mindful of, and I would recommend following Rob Salkowitz's blog. Chris posts his Rob's blogs links on the Trusty Henchman newsletter. But the numbers came in for pre-plague regarding superhero comics, and of course during the plague. And superhero comics are just not selling. And it's something that we all should be paying attention to. And I don't know. I said all these optimistic things, but it's also entirely possible that the pandemic is going to push. It may push us to tell stories differently or to stop telling stories. I don't know. It's sort of up in the air, but superhero books are not selling. And as I'm going on my walks around Green Lake, I am listening to the most recent Audible recording of Neil Gaiman's Sandman stories. And these are brand new audio adaptations with Neil Gaiman narrating them of the 90s era Vertigo Sandman stories that were groundbreaking. And I'm thinking about how the Sandman stories and Morrison's Doom Patrol and Animal Man and of course Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, it changed how we read and saw comics. This was sophisticated suspense. But then for some reason, those Vertigo comics stopped being viable, and we stopped looking at this literary potential of using comic books to tell different kinds of stories. DC in particular fell back, leaned in hard to just superhero comics. We lost Vertigo, but we wound up with this Black Label thing. I'm getting a little bit off on a tangent, but I think it behooves us to pay attention to non-superhero stories and look where that will take us with comics. I think there's something that's going to come back from all that, and it's not going to be superheroes.
Yeah, and I'm excited to find out what it might be. This is a scary time for comic book retailers because DC, one of the big two in comics retail is, canceling all these titles, laying off a bunch of people. Retail stores that depend on new books to bring in customers to buy these things are, they're nervous right now. And but my comic book store has already closed, so I don't care.
Well, I've moved to a different comic book store, and I have to admit it does make me sad to walk into this store because I don't have that community connection. But then let's face it, you and I helped build, or took part in rather, a pretty deeply rooted community at the Comics Dungeon. So I walk into this comic book store. I'm all about supporting this brick and mortar store. But, you know, in the 20 years I've lived in Seattle, the brick and mortar stores that populated the city are now down to a quarter of what they originally were. So I will always encourage everybody to go into your brick and mortar comic book store, pick up your subscriptions, pick up books. Hey, we're in a pandemic, man. You need stuff to read because you need to fend off that isolation and that boredom and that depression. And you need good comic books and graphic novels. I'm just saying, it's good for your head.
Yeah, I shouldn't really say I don't care when it comes to the health of retail stores.
Okay.
Of course I do.
I try to distract everybody from what you said.
Anyway, I'm wondering if DC's issues stem from a top-down culture problem, because it came out that Jeff Johns isn't really such a nice guy after all. Justice League star Ray Fisher, who played Cyborg in Justice League, during the whole shakeup between Zack Snyder leaving and Joss Whedon coming in and basically revamping the entire movie, Ray Fisher had issues with that, and I think a bunch of other people had issues with that too, but Ray was the most vocal about it, and alleges that Jeff Johns, quote, threatened his career if he didn't shut up.
Well, is it Mr. Fisher? What's his name?
Fisher, Ray Fisher.
Yeah, Ray. This is not the first time he said he's voiced feelings of discouragement and frustration over being involved with the Justice League movies, because, you know, he said disparaging things about Joss Whedon, and then he recanted them, I thought, on social media, and then changed his mind. I don't know. What I'm gleaning from this article, this brief piece, is that Jeff Johns thinks he is in a higher pole position as, I guess was he editor in chief for a half a second? I can't remember. I mean, he was a writer turned. See, I will be frank, I don't have a lot of respect for Jeff Johns as a writer. So
fair enough.
And then, you know, putting him into this pole position that he had as, somebody help me out here, editor in chief for a while there. If you look at the article, it looks like what was happening was they were struggling to do rewrites. I'm assuming a lot of things, and Fisher took umbrage with having used to say the line "booyah," which the Cyborg character in Teen Titans Go says, which is just part of that character. And Teen Titans Go, what's that?
It's his catchphrase.
Yeah, it's his catchphrase. And Teen Titans Go is a profoundly successful cartoon on Cartoon Network, and it features all of our original Teen Titans, and they're in a very tongue-in-cheek and frequently satirical context. So and that's where DC lives more so than Marvel, is that you're supposed to be suspending a lot of belief and understanding of, like, how does this work together, you know, like the Harley Quinn TV show and stuff like that, where how does this all fit together? So this cross-pollination, I think, probably, you know, raised Fisher's ire, you know, because he didn't as an actor, he didn't feel that fit with his character. Totally understand that, but we're talking branding and we're talking marketing, and DC's branding has always, you know, for the last decade has been just all over the place. I would call it a mess.
Yeah. But
maybe my understanding is that's what he took issue with, and the best way that Jeff Johns thought to get an actor to compromise with while he was sitting beside his agent was to threaten him with future work. So that's, to me, the sign of a person who has, like, zero leadership skills, really pathetic people skills, and it's just not a very nice guy. But you're also dealing with an actor. I'm just going to let that sit.
What are you saying about actors? Anyway.
Yeah,
so, I mean, I just want to point out that our T-shirt game is on point for this episode. We've spoken a lot about DC and Godzilla. So, good on us. Also, right. Jeff Johns is not a very nice guy. So, hey, we've reached the part where we're going to show our interview now again. If you're just joining us, you should really watch from the beginning because this flows. There's a through
Yes.
line. It doesn't
Yeah,
really.
and I get progressively more tragically tongue-tied as we go on. So catch me when I'm good, not when I'm.
So our friend Cody, I think, takes umbrage at you slighting actors. Anyway, so yeah, we interviewed Barry Ira Geller. We aired part 1 of that interview last week. We're going to show part 2 of this interview today, and then we'll come back afterwards and we'll all talk about it and then say goodbye. So here's part 2 of our interview with Barry Ira Geller.
So you set to work on laying the groundwork to build science fiction land. That's around 1979-ish.
78.
78. Okay. So you were trying to get the science fiction land set up.
Well, the whole point of hiring Jack Kirby,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the greatest artist in the century, and the one who really binded everyone's minds with his amazing perception in comics, storytelling, and architecture. Jack, none of these drawings he did had anything to do, I hate to tell people this, with the novel. None.
Really?
They were all statues and buildings. The names came here and there from the novel.
So these are all environments that you and Jack developed creatively,
Yes.
Inspired by the text, but you kind of like
Yes,
freewheeled, free associated, and came up with these environments.
that's right.
Yeah, a lot of them that are reproduced in this article.
Now, some of them Jack just made up
Sure.
in the flow of things.
Did you and Jack have a back and forth about the creative direction he was going, or did he go away and come back and give you these drawings and basically that was it?
1/3 the former, 2/3 the latter.
Okay.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I bring in paperwork, I bring in books. I would be the guiding light
Mm-hmm.
as to thematic development, because I had specific buildings in mind. I
Right.
had specific statues in mind. Every one of those are buildings that we were already in negotiation to sell to different countries. And so they would pay. That's how I was financing the film.
I see. Okay.
And so they have a building from this country, a building from that country.
Gotcha.
And then outside is these phenomenal statues. I would be sitting there for a couple hours or maybe the whole day with Jack. The thing is, I see a certain glow in his eyes. I swear to you. I don't know what got me to do that, but we would be talking and then I would feel that he understood where I was going.
Huh?
You can't tell someone like Jack Kirby how to draw. Are you out of your mind? It's just like, but we covered the groundwork of themes and concepts and energies that I wanted to see in the theme park that worked its way back from sets in the film.
Gotcha.
And I'd see this glow in his eyes and I knew we were done. I swear to you, I kid you not. It's like, oh, we're done. I would leave, and or we'd do some social stuff, and I'd come back in 3 days to a week, and there's the drawing. I never saw him draw, but there would be the final inked.
Right.
And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't, I thought this is what happens with everybody who works with Jack. He's the purest of heart,
Mm-hmm.
the highest integrity of any man I've ever met. That alone
is damn priceless, is what it is.
So yeah, that was our interview with Barry, and it's been pointed out to me that I am actually wearing the same thing in that, and which is last week. Last week you wore the same T-shirt, I think.
That's right. My takeaway of this excerpt from the interview is something that concerns me is an unprized or perhaps lost art in the comic book culture, and that is the art of collaboration. I was watching Barry and the way Barry lit up talking about collaborating with Jack Kirby. And, you can read interviews with other people who work with Jack. But this is like a very raw, a very visceral feedback that we're getting from Barry. And he still feels lifted up, and he still feels that energy from collaborating with Jack. And it's something that, when we were doing the Prickbound podcast, where I would try to ask other independent creators about their collaboration process, because I feel very strongly so often when I'm talking to comic book creators and we're learning about people banging heads and projects that aren't happening, and even some of the things that we talked about earlier in this episode, I have to stop and go, were you considering what it means to collaborate with somebody? Were you considering the give and take? Were you considering compromise, lifting the other person up? Any of those things, because I'm not getting that from what you're sharing with me. So I think one of the really, really valuable things about having these interviews with Barry is sort of like re-experiencing the joy that he had in collaborating with Jack Kirby. It's really, actually, it kind of made my heart a little bit fuzzy. Want to remind y'all that you can visit Barry's site, www.lordoflight.com, where you can link up to the panel discussions that he had at the virtual panel discussion he had at San Diego Comic-Con. Also, the products that he's working on, the prints, the statuary. I think he may still even have some of the action figures available for purchase, which are one of my, you can't see one, I have the glow in the dark Day Glow one on my wall right here. It's one of my favorite things. So yes, thank you, Barry.
Yeah.
And great job again, Ben, editing that piece. That was great.
Oh, it's what I do. So yeah, next week we're actually planning on doing another one of these next week, and we'll have another excerpt from our interview with Barry. Finally, Cole, you have something you want to plug before we say goodbye?
I do. How many of y'all are familiar with the 1996 cinematic tragedy that was the Miramax adaptation of H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau? Yeah, that's the one with Val Kilmer and I'm drawing a blank here. Help me out.
I'll look it up. I'll keep going.
No, I can't. I hit a loop.
Oh, jeez. Anyway, so we're familiar with it. What do you want to say about it? And I'll tell you who's.
Well, there's a documentary. The documentary is called Lost Soul: The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, and it is. I've heard about how tragic all of this was. So Richard Stanley was a very innovative filmmaker. In 1990, he did a film called Hardware. And in 1991, he did a film called Dust Devil. And I was trying to think of Marlon Brando. And Marlon Brando is somebody I just have a mental block about. And this is the film that Marlon Brando, actually, I think it was the last film that he made, but you can correct me on that because I reserve the right to be wrong. So I'd heard stories about this, Richard Stanley being handed a lot of money to shoot his adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau on a remote location in Australia. And then I heard stories about how the film production broke down. They fired him and then hired John Frankenheimer to come in at the last minute and try to complete the film in under a month, retool the script, fire a bunch of artists, and then try to pull it together. So there's actually a documentary that's made in 2015, Lost Soul, and it is absolutely fascinating. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. I kind of regret not having come across this, because one of the stories I heard about Richard Stanley in this process is that they fired him. He walked off the set and disappeared into the jungle, and then came back a couple weeks later snuck onto the set, donned one of the human animal masks, and was actually an extra in most of the film. So he watched his film being made, and watched this disaster unfold as one of the mutants in the background.
That's got to be
So
weird.
this documentary talks about that experience, interviews him almost exclusively, talks to Fairuza Balk and a couple other actors. But it does go deeper into what an absolute shit show the making of this film was. So I felt really heartbroken over Stanley. He's a very eccentric and very unique individual, and you get that from every time you see him in an interview. But as a fellow artist, I was really heartbroken watching this process. And of course, we get to the end of his major part of his story in the documentary, and he discloses, I didn't think I was ever going to be able to make a film again. And the Fairuza Balk he said he was never going to be able to make a film again, and he became a lost soul. Well, he did start to put his toes back in the water, and I don't always pay attention to the directors on film, especially independent films that I'm watching. But have you all seen this adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space with oh gosh,
Who are you trying to think of now?
I don't know. My brain is dead right now. I can't remember her names. Anyway, so this is actually, if you've seen this film, this is actually quite a fascinating film. And lo and behold, it's Richard Stanley. He directed it. I think this is his first feature film attempt since he was fired from Island of Dr. Moreau. So, yeah. And I do recommend this film. It is absolutely nuts.
So did you come up with the name that you're trying to think of? Was it Marlon Brando?
Nope. This guy. Who's that guy?
David Thewlis?
No. The actor.
Yeah,
we
David...
make fun of him all the time.
Oh. Don't know. I don't know who you're talking about, and I didn't see who that was. Anyway.
This guy. This guy.
It looks like Gary Oldman.
No.
This is fascinating. In the meantime, I think we're going to try to say goodbye. We'll clear this up, and maybe we'll come back next week.
I need to look on IMDb for me, man.
Well, I don't know who you're trying to think of. I'm not going to go through and list all the characters or all the actors in that movie. So, anyway, yeah. So that's it for this week. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for streaming with us on the YouTubes or on the Facebooks. Apparently, a friend of the show, Steven, hosted a watch party, so that was fun. Yeah. And stay tuned to the Pound Trippers Facebook page for more of these. Subscribe to our YouTube. And, Cole, you have an answer.
It's Nicolas Cage.
Wait, let me see that again. Let me see that picture again.
I just have mental blocks on people. That's Nicolas Cage. This is one of those Nicolas Cage vehicles. He got to be weird and wackadoodious. Nicolas Cage!
All right, I don't feel so bad in not recognizing Nicolas Cage in that picture.
Well, I'm not going to rewatch this episode. Chris commented. Chris did peg that as Nicolas Cage. So maybe I am completely off the ball. Anyway, that's our show. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.